What's up, everybody? Welcome to a WNBA State of Mind where we mainly discuss basketball, but we love other sports. And you're an RN, okay, who is an anatomy specialist, blowing up on TikTok, who has studied the human body, right? But in particular, we're going to talk about athletes in particular. And you studied, the body being able to handle extreme workout loads effectively. But before we get into the WNBA playoffs and the NBA preseason, tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Well, thanks, Adrienne, for having me and giving me this opportunity to share a little bit about me. I started my career with actually pursuing kinesiology before nursing, and it was through my kinesiology background that I started my anatomy course and decided that I actually want to tutor it for my undergrad. And I fell in love with the human body so much that I decided to actually intern and work on cadavers. And also, I got invited to do research for um, this publication on um, cardiovascular benefits for surfing in PE students. So it was a pretty cool experience when I was in San Diego. And then with that, I actually learned so much more about how the human body is more about, in kinesiology particularly, about trying to figure out the exercise physiology and lifestyle habits that affect your health as opposed to just medicine and treatment. However, eventually I pursued nursing, and that's where I got deeper into understanding the disease process and how to treat and care for patients and understand the acute and chronic issues that people are way too familiar with these days. And so taking in that whole kinesiology background combined with nursing, I really got a bigger perspective on how the body operates and how you can actually be more involved in taking care of yourself.
See, and this is how I met you, through Prime IV in Chesapeake. I was feeling like crap. I needed another solution because I'm not a medicine taker. I like to use, I like my body to heal itself, but then at the same time use vitamins, supplements, and
Yeah.
nutrients to bring myself back because I know that over time, maybe it'll take a little longer, but
Mm.
over time I'll be better, and then my body will know how to fight against different things. Now, leading into that, talk about like let's talk a little bit about fatigue management, recovery, and mental focus because they're
Mhm.
important, especially during intense stretches. And being a former WNBA player, I choose the WNBA playoffs and the NBA preseason as examples. Like what we just witnessed in the WNBA playoffs is that, it's like mentally and physically draining. You know, what are the first signs that you can tell players, that you can tell coaches, or that you could tell just the general public, like what are the signs of like you're starting to crash out?
That's a really good thing to bring up because a lot of people wait to find out that they're already hurting before actually noticing when things actually started snowballing. And so I would say from those who are observing maybe the athletes, the coaches or teammates, some things you could pay attention to in your team is just like the smallest stuff, like are their speed or their strength or accuracy declining in how they're performing. And you could even notice these things in their biomechanics and simply by watching how they're actually carrying themselves on the court. Is their posture kind of giving way? Or are their patterns starting to kind of slip away from what they typically do? Because we have defaults. And so if your default is starting to show below standard what you normally perform, then there's probably some sign that your body is starting to kind of give way. And, this starts to lead to maybe slower recovery because you might be overdoing it. And that's just like the physical side of fatigue, because there's still also the mental side. And that could just be like not having better reaction time. You might be having lapses in decision making and just not thinking clearly because your focus is off. Sometimes having blank stares even is a sign of mental fatigue. And people don't really realize this because literally they can't tell. You need other people to notice this in you. So you have to be aware of what those signs are in your peers. But one other thing that I would say athletes personally have to track for themselves on a physical and mental side is also their sleep patterns, because no one's going to tell you how you're sleeping, but you can tell if you had quality sleep or if you're having difficulty staying or falling asleep.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of those factors that you said, they're so important, especially during the stressful times during the season, stressful times during the season, or playoffs when you're trying to make it to the next round, trying to make it to the semifinals, you're trying to make it to the finals and all of that stuff. Each level that you go from quarterfinals to semifinals to the finals is taking something out of you. And in each one of those steps, there's a process involved in trying to get yourself to the next level. Sleep, especially, you start dipping out with the mental focus. Talk a little bit about those things, like what can I do to stay mentally focused? How can I keep myself hydrated? What are those things? Like you talked about the sleep, and nobody can tell me how much sleep I'm getting, but there's so many little simple things that you can tap into to help yourself get along.
Yes, when it comes to the mental fatigue, I would say focus on that first, actually, because then everything will come. Because mind over matter is a real thing. You, as a professional athlete, you know that that's a real thing. You have to push. So if you can manage to give yourself some time to have mental breaks, properly debrief with your team, maybe have some mindful activities that can take you away from the structure of the game and the athletic side of it, you can allow that side of your brain to rest and actually do something else. Because it kind of reminds me of how the kind of rest you need if you have a concussion, although that's more extreme, you literally are not allowed to watch TV or do anything. You can't even sleep if you have a concussion. So although that's extreme, in this case, you want to be able to somehow be mindful of how you can turn your brain off and not participate in things that might cause you stress. And so other ways you can do that is through, obviously, like breathing exercises, but there's more details into how you can utilize breathing exercises, because I think a lot of people think it's just about thinking in, out, but a lot of it has to do with breathing slowly and being more cognizant of how long it is when you exhale versus just like taking in deep breaths. Because if you take in a deep breath, that also can cause more stress because you're not even exhaling properly. So there's a lot of nuance to that. And I would even say having unstructured play. You are so used to doing drills and practices, but you have unstructured play, you're allowing your brain to relax and be creative. So there's no pressure in that way. And I think that's one way you can combine the whole mental and physical fatigue relaxation, because the pressure is off.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that you touched upon the extreme, which was a concussion, because there was one player for the Phoenix Mercury who suffered a concussion and could not play for the last game. And they actually ended up getting swept 4-0, and that was Sato Sabali. She suffered a concussion the game before and wasn't allowed to play. So, those things really do happen. And then sometimes you have situations that happen that you just cannot control, and the outcome is going to be that you have to be out regardless as to what nutrition you have or what kind of rest you get. It's just going to be that you have to be out, and you're listening to a WNBA State of Mind. I got my girl May on here, super RN, super anatomy, super human body over here, talking about basketball with your girl over here. Let's flip it a little bit now. We talked about the WNBA. Playoffs are over. Now we're in the preseason with men. Okay, now they have a unique issue. Okay, two-a-day practices, which are super, 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 super hard because you're transitioning. In the morning, you're probably going to do your lifting, your weights. You're also going to do your conditioning and your running. Okay. Then in the afternoon or later on, mid-evening, you are going to do your second practice. And most of that entails running up and down the floor, running plays, shooting, getting it in. So now your body has to transition and your mind has to transition to like 3 or 4 different type workouts, okay, during preseason. In that time, let's discuss the connection between muscle fatigue and mental slippage, because during this time you are going to have some serious mental slippage because your body is really dealing with a lot of fatigue, a lot of pain, a lot of cortisol, a lot of lactic acid. How do they feed off of each other? Mental fatigue, mental slippage. For example, you had Kelsey Mitchell of the Indiana Fever. Okay, she had to go to the hospital after the last playoff game because her muscles completely gave out, similar to paralysis, and that's scary. So talk to me about it, May.
So when it comes to muscle and the nervous system, right, we're thinking about mind and body connection. There's literally a main function there. It's called the neuromuscular junction. I know it sounds fancy, but literally the nerve has to control the muscle. And when one of those goes out, the other one is going to fall. It's a feedback loop. And so the condition that your muscles are at, if you're pushing them and pushing them, you are now demanding more of your nervous system to be able to recruit more of your muscles that are operating in this athletic arena. And so you are literally playing this game of tug of war between your mind and your body. These muscles require this recruitment of activity because there is this relationship that they share. And so if you think about it, when your body is requiring you to do more, your mind is going to have to overcome that and compensate. There's a lot of compensatory mechanisms in the body. And with that feedback mechanism, if you start to slip physically, your mind's going to compensate. Now, with her, she experienced a paralysis state, as you mentioned. And so that's literally what happens. Your brain can no longer handle the demands that your body is trying to request and demand in this state. And so how do you even notice that it's getting to that point? You have to start noticing whether you have any of those mental slippages of, let's say, the things I mentioned earlier with the bad passes or blank stares or just changing your tactics and posture. These things accumulate. And that's the thing. It's something that you have to notice little at a time and put that big picture together so you could say stop before it gets to that point.
Powerful, absolutely powerful, because witnessing this over the last couple of weeks, last couple of days has been absolutely phenomenal. And I've been saying over and over, to the listeners out there, it is survival of the fittest. And you have to eat right, you have to drink right, you got to sleep right, you got to socialize right, shut down the social media, all these little things, the distractions, every single thing matters, every single thing counts. And, if you want to win a championship, there's a lot of sacrifice involved. Okay. We talked about the small daily habits like sleeping and breathing and nutrition, and noticing the things that can happen. Now, here's another bear. Okay. With the travel days and short recovery windows, how can a player maintain the rhythm and the hydration balance? Discuss some like creative, uh, good habits that an athlete can adopt, or somebody that's just completely on the run all the time.
Yes, you mentioned travel, and I would say, these athletes are traveling to different time zones. One thing that stands out to me in that regard is your sleep patterns going to suffer because you're now having to wake up at different times, and who knows what time you went to bed, and dealing with how stressful the day was, you have to compound all of that together. When it comes to sleep patterns, one thing that you could do is actually give yourself an opportunity to look at your environment and see what you could do that requires nothing like to purchase. You could literally turn down the temperature in your room so you could have cooler sleeping. That actually puts you in a better state for having a deeper sleep. And you could even just put face masks on and put blackout curtains just so that you can make sure you stimulate, or excuse me, not stimulate, but simulate this dark space. Because if you're always around bright lights, being out in the limelight as an athlete, you're definitely around a lot of stimuli. So you need to quiet your brain, and you're essentially trying to trick it to be able to think that you're about to go and shut down and truly rest. And that's one thing you can do as far as when it comes to sleep. I would also recommend to try and avoid using melatonin. I know a lot of people like to use like sleep aids, but that melatonin, I would argue, is something that is going to mess with your hormones because you have something called your circadian rhythm. And one thing you need to be mindful is that this melatonin is going to be secreting throughout the day based off of your exposure to sunlight. And if you are messing with that sunlight, that your mind is perceiving as real light, even though it might just be lights from your phone, right? Or just your TV. Now you're messing with the secretion process that your body demands on a normal basis. And so if you add more melatonin, now you're just changing the levels. And so I would recommend things like ashwagandha because that actually helps with the cortisol levels rather than the hormones of what involve your sleep rhythm. And on the topic of the circadian rhythms, you can actually start looking outside of your window and looking at natural sunlight in the early morning, just so you could signal your brain to start secreting the melatonin sooner and create that rhythm so that by the time you actually do have to sleep, you've actually produced the appropriate amount that your body requires to help you fall asleep and stay asleep. So that's just the sleep part, but there's so many other things, but I could go on. I think you mentioned something about hydration and breathing. I would even say you could add some more electrolytes. I think that's a gimme, but be mindful of the types of electrolytes you start using because a lot of them are heavy on the sugars and they may not all be complete with the electrolytes you actually require for proper signaling and cellular function. A lot of them out there, they lack magnesium, and that is a key feature that is going to help with your overall body function. I think magnesium is one of those electrolytes that somehow fall under the radar as insignificant, but it is significant. And so I've seen stuff like Celtic salt, which is complete in all its electrolytes. And just be mindful, and when you read the packet, make sure it actually has like the calcium, sodium, and magnesium included, and look at the ratios for that sugar because you don't want those spikes either because that will also affect your sleep. And then, of course, sleeping, or excuse me, breathing. You definitely want to practice your breathing. And as I mentioned earlier, you can control how your resting mindset can be operating throughout your whole body because believe it or not, when you inhale, that actually signals what we call the fight or flight response. It's the sympathetic nervous system. But if you exhale slowly, you are actually signaling the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest. And so, who doesn't love it when their digestion system is actually working properly? And this is part of that rest process. Notice that when relax and you just ate, you don't feel stressed out because you are resting and digesting. That's what you've signaled your body to start focusing on. But you can actually control this through your breath. And so that's one thing that I would recommend. If you're on the airplane, you can start doing breathing exercises and preparing yourself for that maybe time zone change so that you can also prepare for proper sleep and rest.
Awesome. Awesome. There's so many different things that people can latch on to after that, because it's important to get a mental reset for the brain and the body. And achieving that, sometimes can be a task, but it takes discipline, for you to reach that. And once you get to a point, I found as an athlete, and it carried over into my life as, not as a non-athlete, once you adopt those great habits, when you're younger, you know, you're going to carry that for the rest of your life, but it's not too late to do it right now. And you're listening to a WNBA State of Mind. I'm on here with my girl, May Bravo, and we're chopping it up about ways to increase your performance as an athlete, but not only as an athlete, but a person who is constantly on the run. And also for somebody who's interested in changing their lifestyle, as of right now. And there are many, many WNBA players, okay, that play year round, all right, overseas. How should their recovery approach differ from an off-season player, okay, who stays home, works out daily, and is playing in the unrivaled 3-on-3 league, and it's only for like 90 days, 120 days max? What's the difference between the girl that's playing overseas and the girl that's working out equally as hard, but not as hard here in the United States, what would you tell?
Well, as far as recovery and how they can handle maintaining that proper rhythm and also make sure that they be mindful of the cues of what mental slippage looks like and physical fatigue looks like, you also have to be mindful of the environment you're in. I would say a lot of it has to do with where you are because if you're traveling, you're not at home. That's a factor all in itself that can really trickle down into your performance because you don't have the comfort of the familiarity of things. And even though you're deep in your game, there's that underlying thought of you not being where you're used to. And so you have to be cognizant of how you're going to handle being away from what's normal and what's routine. Because you, depending on how long you're actually going to be away and traveling, you have to be quick to adapt. And that's not always easy. So you have to condition yourself in such a way so that you can be ready to have a routine that's transferable. You know, if you're at home and you're not under that same pressure, you can just fall into routine pretty easily, I would say, just because there's something that you can anchor onto. You're defaulting essentially. But a lot of it really comes down to, I would say, is having that discipline that you said, knowing what your body does on a normal basis so you can create a baseline of where you could start noticing changes. And if you could create that type of awareness in yourself, then you could at least be mindful of when things start to go awry.
Yeah, absolutely. And the biggest thing is being mindful. As an athlete, you have to be mindful of your body, be mindful of your mental state, be mindful of all of the things that are going around you, because if you're in season, all of those things play out. They all play out from the simplest things. They all play out from sleep to nutrition to water to the crowd that you're hanging out, what time you go to sleep, what time you get up, all of the travel, waking up and not realizing or knowing what city that you're in because you've traveled so much going back and forth during the playoffs. I've experienced that one time with myself. Now, the last question I wanted to ask you, all right, if possible, okay, discuss the difference between good soreness and injury pain.
I actually really love this question because having gone through nursing school, we didn't cover this kind of stuff. But thankfully, when I was in my kinesiology program, we covered the understanding of exercise physiology. And so together, you're asking something about injury pain and then also about muscle soreness. So these are like the two wheelhouses that I can speak to for sure. And so when it comes to um, injury pain, these are the basics. You're looking for inflammation. It's usually a sooner onset. This is something where the pain tends to be sharp and more apparent. You might have more guarding to the area of concern, and you can observe for certain signs and symptoms. Say you might have some redness or swelling or heat around that area. So that's one thing you can notice on the initial onset. You might notice that this injury pain is actually not recovering very well and you can't put weight on it or you can't utilize it. So the function actually decreases. Now, you might notice that with some uh, issues when it comes to soreness. You know, sometimes you have a really good workout and you're like, I can't sit down because I had a good leg day, but that's not injury pain. That's what we call DOMS or delayed onset muscle soreness. And so, what delayed onset muscle soreness are microfiber tears throughout your muscles. And so, this can happen from overworking muscles that may have not been familiar with that type of exercise, but it doesn't have the same long term consequences as an injury does because these are natural tears that happen but are going to repair over time. And so one ways that you can ensure that there's not going to be long-term lasting effects with that soreness is making sure you stay moving and increase that circulation to the area so that the oxygen and nutrients are traveling to the area of concern where you had that delayed onset muscle soreness. But you'll notice a huge difference when if you have that soreness, it's usually more dull and it can recover over a few more days. But that injury pain tends to take a longer recovery, or may not have a recovery for like maybe even weeks, just because it was that severe.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Like I said, listening to a WNBA State of the Mind, we chopping it up, getting some valuable points on the mind, body, and playoffs. Also, I'm gonna throw in the NBA preseason and staying ahead of fatigue with May Bravo. May, tell everyone how they can connect with you on social, because you're doing a bang up job on TikTok. You do anatomy tutoring. Discuss ways that people can connect with you on social media if they're a student and they're trying to pass anatomy.
Well, thank you for that. I have my platforms on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube. I'm primarily on TikTok. My handle is at the anatomy tutor, as it sounds, as it's spelled. And yeah, those are my areas where you can reach me. It's great because I have all these areas where students log on and are able to find my videos and be able to get the tips they need just so they can pass that next quiz or exam, or just find some understanding. So if you ever wanted to reach out in that way, I also have my email, which is bravo.tutor@gmail.com. If you just want to shoot a DM my way, that's another way you can reach me.
And I said all of that on mute. And don't forget to download, okay, a WNBA State of Mind. Download, like, share, repost, hashtag WNBA State of Mind. Stay tuned for the Health Playbook with me, May, and Dr. B coming here soon on Prism TV. Sammy Sosa, peace out. Yeah.